The United States of America, for the first time since Donald Trump's threat to send Iran back to the Stone Age, has struck Iran's civilian infrastructure. In fact, this marks a new stage in the war, as Iran has begun to actively strengthen its defenses in preparation for an American ground invasion. Right now, Tehran is strengthening the defenses around its largest oil port, while at the same time threatening to strike a wider range of targets in the Persian Gulf region, and by launching a massive campaign to recruit new soldiers into its army. At the same time, the Pentagon has begun removing generals who disagree with Donald Trump's orders, and Trump himself has already requested a record $1.5 trillion for 2027 военного бюджета. At the same time, footage appeared from the Pentagon showing how the Americans, for example, destroyed a bridge that connects Tehran with the western part of the country. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start this episode, I ask you to support the work of this YouTube channel. Trump has already requested a record $1.5 trillion for the year. Can you support the channel financially? All the links and details on how to do this are in the description of this video. It says support Alexei Pecci's channel there. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support. And subscribe to the Pecci News Telegram channel. The link is also in the description. So, recently the Americans have been purging generals who disagree with Donald Trump's orders. In his address, he threatened to send Iran back to the Stone Age. At the same time on the strategic bridge. The attack on Bridge B1 under Trump targeted record numbers of American military objectives and could be the first step toward attacks on energy, water, and transportation infrastructure. Trump stated that the US could carry out similar attacks which would have devastating consequences for the Iranian civilian population to punish the regime if it does not agree to a deal. Representatives of the U.S. Department of Defense claimed that the strike on the bridge also disrupted the transfer of weapons by Iranian armed forces across that bridge, and in the Pentagon, they said that other bridges will also become targets of strikes. They say, "That's it, we're starting." Generals Trump has already requested $1.5 trillion and it will never be used again. There will be a lot more interesting things ahead. It's time for Iran to make a deal. At the same time, in the Pentagon, they began those of Donald Trump, and this is really the biggest bridge, you could say, in the Middle East. It connects Tehran, a record Takomane 5, although American officials stated that the bridge was opened. Iranian media report that this bridge is still not operational. That is, at the time, it had not yet been completed. The Americans say it was completed, so we destroyed it. A representative of the U.S. Department of Defense agrees with Donald's orders. The armed forces used it for secretly transporting missiles and their parts, and Trump has already requested a record amount for the year, 5 in больших ящиках и контейнерах. Time at the Pentagon. The purge of generals who did not follow Donald's orders for technical support to Iranian military forces in Tehran. The second U.S. Department of Defense representative. Trump requested this as a planned military supply route to support Iranian forces, ballistic missiles, and strike drones. But he did not specify whether this bridge is currently being used for these purposes because he says, well, supposedly. After that, it became known that Tehran is strengthening the defenses around its largest oil port, while simultaneously threatening to strike a wider range of targets in the Persian Gulf region. They started with Trump, but into a massive campaign to recruit new soldiers into their army. And unfortunately, as you already know, we are discussing this for a year. In Iran, they allowed conscription and the distribution of weapons, dollars. At the same time, Iran is strengthening its defenses on Kark Island, which could become the target of a U.S. ground operation. The measures include strengthening guided missile systems and installing mines along the coast. The purge of generals who disagree with Donald is underway. He is preparing to defend, probably through tunnel raids. And Trump has already requested a record $1.5 trillion for the year. Military analysts claim that Tehran has about 1 million active and reserve servicemen, including around 190,000 highly motivated fighters from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they suggest that the US would need to land more than 100,000 troops along the entire coastline to protect these islands and the strait, because any other option would result in huge losses for the Americans. Is Trump ready to send 100,000 troops? It's still unknown. At the same time, the Pentagon is actually preparing for some kind of military landing in Iran. But today, something unusual happened, although if you look at it in the context of a possible preparation for a ground invasion, it's not that unusual. In short, the head of the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth, dismissed about 20 high-ranking American officers, including the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, General Randy George. This large-scale personnel purge is taking place against the backdrop of the war with Iran and preparations for a possible ground operation. Units of the 82nd Airborne Division have already been deployed in the Middle East. And it's important to note here that not all military personnel and not all experts approve of the military operation, specifically a ground invasion of Iran, which is why unwanted generals are simply being dismissed. Interestingly, 61-year-old General Randy George is a career operations officer and a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. He was considered one of the most likely candidates for dismissal even before being appointed Chief of Staff of the Army in 2023 because he had previously been the senior aide to former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin under Joe Biden. But George managed to keep his position for a long time. At the same time, 2 other generals were also dismissed along with him, the head of the Army Training and Transformation Command, David Hodden, and the chief American chaplain, William Green Jr. Hegseth also removed or blocked the promotion of a number of other high-ranking officers. In addition, Hegseth shook up the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is the main advisory body of the Pentagon. From the old committee, only the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Eric Smith, and the head of the Space Force, Chance Saltzman, kept their positions. At the beginning of last year, Trump's team dismissed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Charles Brown Jr., the head of the Navy, Lisa Franchetti, the Coast Guard commander, Linda Fagan, and the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Air Force, James Slife. Hegseth also demanded the early resignation of the Air Force Chief of Staff, David Ulvin. In short, they simply went through all branches of the military. And here's a real shock. The Washington Post notes that Pete Hegseth has long criticized the military leadership for, of all things, not being loyal enough to Donald Trump. The new Trump administration policy is also influencing the dismissals, because among those dismissed, there is a disproportionately high number of women and minorities. As a result, the military operation Epic Fury has been going on for 5 weeks now, but the pressure on Donald Trump is only increasing. Because the military campaign is costing the US billions of dollars every day. And it has led to an increase in fuel prices and remains unpopular. Since it began, the president's approval ratings have dropped to a historic low. The regime in Iran hasn't changed. Well, the son replaced the father. And it retains the ability to strike targets in the Persian Gulf and Israel. According to US intelligence, about half of Iran's missile launchers remain intact. And Iran still has thousands of attack drones in its arsenal. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has submitted a request to Congress for a sharp increase in the military budget to pay for weapons procurement, army modernization, and the war in Iran. The White House's request for the Pentagon's 2027 budget amounts to $1.5 trillion, and compared to the current year, it increases by about $500 billion. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, it's very important. Hit the bell and don't forget to like. If you found the information useful and interesting, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation. For example, by using the QR code on your screen or the links in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.